I want to talk about why Malaysia keeps coming up on this channel. And it's not because I'm trying to sell anyone on moving there. It's because Malaysia exposes something that a lot of Americans, especially later in life, are quietly starting to notice. And before I go any further, I know how this probably looks. A guy in a winter coat sitting in a car in Western New York talking about Southeast Asia. But that's the phase most people are in when they're making these decisions. We're still at home, still working, still thinking things through before anything changes. And if you're an American in your 40s, 50s, or early 60s, and you've started questioning whether the traditional path still works the way it used to, this conversation's going to be for you. Now, what Malaysia highlights isn't the beaches or the food or the travel perks. It highlights the growing gap between effort and return. In the West, especially, as you're getting older, the effort, it keeps increasing. Your housing, healthcare, insurance, taxes, rules, stress. But the return, that's peace of mind, stability, optimism. And it doesn't increase at the same pace. Now, Malaysia breaks that pattern in some very specific ways. Not perfectly and not for everyone. And definitely not without trade-offs. Let's start off with healthcare, because this is where the conversation usually gets real. Private healthcare in Malaysia, it isn't cheap in the backpacker fantasy sense, but it's predictable. You can see a specialist and you can understand the cost up front. And you're not navigating weeks of uncertainty just to get basic answers. Now, Malaysians watching this already know the difference between public and private care. And they know the regional differences. And they know where the system works well and where it doesn't. And that context matters. But from an outsider's perspective, especially someone that's older, predictability matters more than bargain pricing. The same thing shows up in daily life. Malaysia isn't chaotic the way people expect South Asia to be. And that's not rigid in the way that the West has become. There's a middle ground. And for people who remember how things used to feel, that middle ground stands out immediately. Cost of living is another area where expectations, they get distorted. Malaysia is not about living like a king on $1,000 a month. That's not realistic. What it does offer is flexibility. Look, you can scale your lifestyle up or down without your entire life breaking. That kind of elasticity disappears in a lot of Western countries as you get older. There's also a social aspect people don't talk about enough. Malaysia, it doesn't feel constantly performative. There's less edge in everyday interactions, less sense that everyone is wound up tight all the time. That doesn't mean there aren't frustration or problems. And Malaysians will be the first to point those out. But for outsiders, that baseline calm is noticeable. Here's the key point. Malaysia didn't make me want to leave the West. It just made it harder to ignore what I already felt. Now, when you see a place that functions well enough without constant escalation, you start asking why everything back home feels like it's always turned up to 11. That's why these videos resonate. People who live in Malaysia, they recognize the nuance immediately. And people watching from the outside recognize the contrast. And when those two perspectives meet in the comments, well, you actually get closer to the truth most move abroad content never allows. This channel is becoming less about countries and more about clarity, about timing, about trade-offs, about asking better questions before making irreversible decisions later in life. Now, Malaysia just happened to be the place that forced that conversation first. And we're going to keep having it honestly. Now, if you made it all the way through the end of this video, I appreciate that. Most people, they don't sit through conversations like this anymore. Now, if this way of thinking resonates with you, clarity over hype, trade-offs over fantasy, you might want to stick around. And if you have perspectives to add, especially if you live in Malaysia, the comments are where this conversation actually gets better. So, that's it. Thanks for listening and take care. And I will see you in the next one.